Hello, my name is Kathy Porter. I'm a partner at Robinson & Cole, and I'm here to talk with you about anti-bribery and anti-corruption compliance for Ensign Bickford and its subsidiaries. Our agenda today first included an introduction by General Counsel Dorothy Hammett, and will continue with a discussion of the global impacts of bribery and corruption, the elements of a violation of an anti-bribery or anti-corruption law, some of the key enforcement trends around the world, and then components of the company's compliance program. And then we'll have a review. The global impacts of bribery and corruption are significant. The World Bank estimates that more than $1 trillion are paid in actual bribes each year in both developed and developing countries. $1 trillion is 3% of the world economy. So the amount of money that's paid each year is quite significant. The common bribery and corruption scenarios are that a person will try to influence the outcome of a situation. They'll try to seek a reduction in customs duties or taxes. They'll try to obtain a waiver of a government requirement. They'll try to influence inspectors to get them to approve a shipment of goods, or they'll seek to import prohibited goods or goods at a reduced tariff. They may try to win approval of a contract or proposal or a bid, or they'll try to sabotage a competitor's proposal or regulatory approval. And they may just try to simply expedite an approval of a government contract or license. And they may also try to obtain information. Those are all common scenarios that we hear about involving bribery and corruption. There are many excuses that people give for bribery and corruption. Typically those are, everyone does it in this country. We didn't know that our agent was paying money. It was just tickets to a ball game or money for an event. It was just a small amount of money. It was a few dollars. Or our company requires that we move quickly. We have sales goals that we have to meet. Those are all common excuses that are given for making bribes of many sizes. But those bribes have an impact. They tend to decrease economic growth and investment in a country. They increase the cost of doing business because that money is added to every business's cost. They involve abusing a public office for private gain of one company. They cause the market entry costs to be increased. And making bribes facilitates organized crime and terrorist activity. These laws and policies have a long reach. They can apply to an entity or a person who has a demonstrable business presence in a relevant country. So you can violate a law in a country as a foreign national or a business entity while you're in that particular country, or if you have formal ties with a country, even if you take your action outside the country. And you can also violate a law because you take action in your home country, perhaps to promote a corrupt payment by using the mail or by using wire transfer, or you commit another act that occurs in your home country, but it involves another country. So it's very easy to be in one location and be found to be violating the law of another country. You should also know that today countries are exchanging information and assistance with each other so that they can more easily prosecute entities and individuals. These countries, the government officials, have power over the people. They can compel people to testify, they can detain people or restrict their movements, and they have power over records. They can subpoena bank records, corporate records, individual records, and they can seize money in bank accounts or trace money transfers that are being made. So it's very difficult to escape scrutiny if there's evidence of corruption or bribery. These laws and policies also have a broad scope. The activities that can trigger an offense include anything from a phone call or an email, sending something in the US mail or local country mail, or using a bank to clear funds and to make payments. Any action that you take in exchange for influencing an act within an office or with an official can be considered an activity that would trigger the offense. They also have a broad scope because of who's responsible if there is a violation. An individual is responsible, an employee, an agent, a corporate entity can be responsible. Also, the parent company and affiliate entities can be responsible depending on the level of involvement in the particular activity. The penalties are very broad. There are penalties which include fines, sanctions, and prison time. In some countries, if you violate the law, you could go to prison for life, and in extreme circumstances, you can be put to death. And there are very limited defenses to these violations. There's no one standard defense. There's very few overall. And it's, to be clear, local custom in a country is not a defense. You cannot say, this is the way that business is done, and therefore I wasn't violating any law. That is not a defense. We should also say that the laws have a broad scope because they apply to bribes of public officials, bribes of private parties, their employers, and their agents. And the targets of an investigation include the person making the bribe, the company who that person works for, the person who receives the bribe, and the company or agency that that person works for, and any agents in the interim. These laws and policies have a broad scope because they apply to public individuals, they apply to employees, private parties, the companies involved, and their agents. The targets of the investigation are all of those people and companies, and the penalties are imposed on the individuals as well as the companies and the agents who are working for either side. Let's talk a little bit about the elements of a violation of an anti-corruption or anti-bribery law. The first element is payment. The second element is it involves a foreign or a private company official. The third element is intent. The fourth element is securing an improper advantage. And the last element is a business purpose. Let's talk about each one of these in detail. The first element, payment. There must be a payment, an offer or a promise to pay. We think of a payment as just being cash, but it's really anything of value. A gift, it could be hospitality or travel expenses, it could be a loan or a credit, it could be a false invoice, it could be offering a job for a relative or other close contact. In many countries, payments are also asked for political or charitable donations. Payments could also be offering to pay training or educational expenses, or offering in-kind help, or some sort of success fee. Payments can be direct, or they can be indirect through a third-party agent or an intermediary, a sales agent or distributor. And it's important to underscore that success is not necessary. You can offer to make a payment, you can make a payment, but it doesn't necessarily require that there be success, that you actually get the contract in order for there to be a violation. The fact that you offered to make a payment is enough for a violation. In some countries, low-level employees request a modest payment or donation to help them speed up the processing of a license or approval. You should really take care with this because no amount is too small. These small payments are prohibited by the company as well as most anti-bribery and anti-corruption laws. So even a small payment just to speed up the processing of a license can be considered a bribe. I wanted to offer you some strategies for resisting a demand for payment. You should always try to remain calm and use your negotiation skills. Don't pay or offer to pay. In many cases, if you have a colleague stand with you or attend the meeting with you, that's very helpful because that will discourage the official from asking for the payment because they know that there's a witness to the transaction. If the conversation is being held within the company's facility, consider videotaping the transaction. Inform the official that you're doing so and explain that this is the company's standard operating procedure. Be sure to take notes of conversations, who you had them with and what was said, so that you have a record. And keep any papers or documents that an official may give to you. If you are asked to make a payment, really question the legitimacy of the request. Ask the official, where is the requirement in writing? Where is the law that requires that this fee be paid in order to process this license or submit this application? If the official can't supply you with the official validity of the payment necessity, refuse to make it. Make the point in a personal way. Use a soft tone. Say, I'll get into real trouble if I make this. Don't try to take a confrontational tone with them. If the official still demands payment, respectfully ask to see that person's supervisor. And if the person refuses you the opportunity to meet the supervisor, ask the official for a written statement that confirms that they asked you for the payment, that you're not asking them. This may be helpful to you later on if the official starts saying that you're the one that offered to make the payment to them, if this situation ever comes to light. And again, refuse to make the payment and report the incident to the company as soon as possible using the hotline. I have a couple of scenarios for you which I think will illustrate some of the points that I'm making. This first scenario is about payments. The first scenario is a sales executive and a colleague are visiting a country to attend a business development meeting that your local agent has arranged with the procurement officials in the country to talk about the company's products. To prepare for this meeting, you first meet with your agent, Ms. Hammer. The meeting has been arranged by the agent's independent consultant, Mr. Barnes, who has a nickname, Commander. You attend the lunch meeting with the head of the government procurement agency, Mr. Caputo. You and your colleague make a great presentation about your products. You notice that there are half a dozen soldiers present during this lunch meeting. After the meeting, you go back to Ms. Hammer's office and you discuss how the lunch meeting went and the next steps. During the conversation, Ms. Hammer abruptly says,
"Let me be candid about the way things work in our country. Money will need to be paid to Mr. Caputo or to the government group if we are to sell your product instead of what they currently buy. I know how this man works. He expects money. Could be $5,000, could be $50,000. Don't worry, we don't have to pay him. He wants to be paid in cash in a small bag, and I will do it. He also asked me to give his nephew a job in my sales office. The kid just graduated from college. I just wanted you to know what was happening."
No, we don't approve of making this payment or hiring his nephew. We're required to follow the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act and company policy, which means we don't make payments like that, and we don't give anything of value, like offering a job. We're not allowed our agents to do that either.
Well, I just wanted you to know the way things are done in this country.
No, you can't pay that. We can get in a lot of trouble just talking about that. We're just not going to pay.
The meeting ended shortly after this exchange. The agent and the consultant have not mentioned this to the company again. The two company employees reported the incident via the company's hotline and wrote it up. So in this first scenario, you can see that this involved someone explaining that a payment was going to be asked for. And just a couple of observations I would make about the scenario. I think it's very good that the company person did not attend the meetings alone. As I mentioned, a colleague was always with the sales executive at the meetings, so they heard the information about a payment being requested together. And it's very good to invite discussion, as I said, to make clear that you're not paying the amount, but also to invite discussion about the request for the amount. And I should also mention that there was a statement about an interest in having a relative hired. As I mentioned, making a payment is not just about paying money. It could also involve offering a position to a relative. It's unclear what other activity occurred after this meeting, but I think we can agree that it would be very important to do some additional due diligence on this agent as they're freely talking about payments being necessary in their country to do business, as well as doing some due diligence about whether it makes sense to work with this agency, particularly if a payment is going to be requested again as the bid is submitted. The second element of a violation is that there is a foreign official or a private company official involved. A private company official is broadly defined. It's really anyone who's involved in taking the relevant action or making the decision to purchase, sell, or otherwise take action. A foreign official includes someone who's an officer or an employee at any level of government, federal, state, local, or any public international organization, or any person who acts in an official capacity for or on behalf of any level of government or any public international organization. And by that I mean, for example, the Red Cross. It includes a private company that's controlled by the government, so a quasi-agency would also be considered an official. And as I mentioned, it includes a private company as well as government officials. As you engage in your business in multiple countries, I know that you often use third-party agents. It's important to note that a payment made through a third party acting on behalf of the company can result in liability for the company. The company is responsible for the acts of its agents, even if the company was unaware that the agent had offered payment, so you can't just keep your head in the sand. Agents include subcontractors, sales agents, freight forwarders, visa processors, accountants, and lawyers. So it's very important to know who your agents are. You can scrutinize third-party agents before you engage them initially, but it's also important to remember that you should continue to conduct due diligence on them over the course of your relationship. You should ask, as part of your due diligence, is this agent qualified for the project? Is this agent willing to sign the company's anti-corruption policy as part of their contract? Does this agent have ties to government officials or employees or officials at the company that we're targeting, such that I might be nervous that the only reason that they're being hired is because of those connections? Do due diligence to find out if this agent has any pending or prior wrongdoing investigations, fines, or convictions. Is the agent located in the jurisdiction that I'm targeting? What is the agent's reputation? You can often consult with the local embassy or consulate or other local business people to find out what the reputation is of the agent that you're talking to. You can also find out more about an agent by asking about their other clients. What's the reputation of the other clients? Are they companies that you yourself know abide by anti-corruption policies, or are they companies who may have had issues with governments in the past on anti-corruption? And just generally, do you sense any red flags with this agent? So it's important to consider as you're thinking about marketing, selling to foreign governments, foreign private parties, and you might be using agents to do that. Know who your agents are and have confidence in their willingness to abide by the anti-corruption policy of the company. I have a second scenario for you which involves third-party agents. In the second scenario, you attend an industry trade show in a country and you meet a person, Ms. Smith. She calls herself a business consultant. She helps companies in your industry obtain business. You agree to meet the next morning for coffee to discuss possibly working together. Over coffee, you ask Ms. Smith about her business and working in this country. She seems to know everyone, and she mentions that her brother is a high-ranking official in the country's agency.
I have expertise in furniture, leather products, and chemical products, and spare parts.
Those are not our industry, so how can you help us? Also, I noticed that your office address on your business card is not located in this country. It is located in a different country. Why is that?
I'm a quick study. If I need help, I can always bring in another consultant, and it'll make me move faster. I'm really not here in this country very much. That's why I asked payments to be wire transferred. That way it's easier for me to get them processed. I know my brother and his wife want to come visit your facility in the U.S., maybe by way of New York City and some Broadway shows.
Later, you meet with your colleague Mike to discuss Ms. Smith and her possible services.
Mike, I met with this consultant yesterday who seems very wired into the agency we are pitching to. She doesn't have a lot of experience in our industry, but she knows the right people. She also says she knows other consultants who can help her. One thing is that she wants to send us invoices that just say commission and to send payment only by wire transfer to a bank in Switzerland.
Well, it sounds like she could really help us out, but I'm not sure if the payment will work with our company policy. Maybe we could set up like a code name for her with her address in the country so that the address won't seem so odd. But we really need to be careful here, so maybe I can use my Gmail account to talk to Ms. Smith and get it set up. And we can also use prepaid mobile phones to get this done.
I wanted to make a few observations about this second scenario. This second scenario involved a company that was hiring a third-party agent. And you'll notice that they made little or no due diligence efforts to find out about this consultant before deciding to engage them. This despite the fact that there were many red flags involved. The agent didn't seem to have the relevant experience. They were located outside the country that the company was targeting. They asked that payments be made to them in an offshore bank account, be wired to them, and that the nature of the work being done would be sort of vague and undescribed. In this case, the company would be found to sort of know that there was an issue with the consultant, with the agent that was being hired. They would not be able to say that they didn't know that this agent was making payments on the company's behalf because they really made no effort to find out that the agent was trustworthy and would agree to abide by the company's policies. There's a particular case that recently occurred in Connecticut involving a local company. This company paid more than $75 million to secure $4 billion in projects, and the company made a profit of approximately $300 million. And the company was found to be engaging in these practices. The very scenario that we provided to you is exactly what the company did in engaging these agents. The company was fined more than $770 million, so twice the profit that they made. And the individuals involved were arrested, and 3 of them have been convicted and are awaiting sentencing. So it's a good example of knowing that if you decide not to do due diligence, you can still be found responsible. In this case, the company individuals did additional things, agreeing to pay the way the consultant wanted to be paid, using prepaid cell phones, using personal email. That's taken from another actual scenario where the company officials made efforts to avoid detection by using personal emails instead of the company email. But again, it shows that the authorities work together to uncover the information and the paper trail, electronically or paper, in order to find out the information about how the payments are made and how people are talking to each other. The example that I gave to you involving third-party agents is a company just located north of Hartford, Alstrom. Here's a screenshot of the Wall Street Journal article talking about the executive who was arrested on bribery charges back in 2013. The company, as I mentioned, paid a fine of $770 million, which is one of the highest fines ever paid. The third element of a violation is intent. What was the intent when the payment was made or offered? A payment that is attempted, offered, or made to obtain or retain business or to get an advantage in the conduct of business is considered to be intent. It's again important to note that the act itself doesn't have to be completed. Just making the offer is enough to violate the law. And the act doesn't have to be successful. You don't actually have to make the payment or secure the outcome that you seek in order for the act to be considered a violation. Examples of intent might mean to win a government contract, which was the case in some of the violations in Alstrom. It might be to secure direct sales rights or to avoid penalties and suppress negative news articles. These were facts in the Avon Products case. And it might also be to reduce tax liability and penalties, or to expedite clearance of goods through customs, to secure border entry permits and work permits, and to avoid penalties for not complying with local labor and immigration law. This was the case with Lane Christensen, another company that was found to violate the anti-bribery laws. Beware, however, that you may have violated the law even if you had no corrupt intent. You may have violated the law if you weren't trying to convince an official to act improperly or in violation of his or her duty. So you may be trying to persuade an official to go easy on the company. That may not be a violation, but in your persuasion, you offer a payment. So now you've committed a violation. It's certainly fine to advocate for the company, but making the payment as part of that advocacy can be considered a violation of law. The fourth element is securing an improper advantage. This is inducing an official to use their influence to affect a decision or an act. And again, the act or the decision does not need to be improper or illegal. It's the persuasion, the effort that's being made, coupled with the offer of a payment that creates the violation. And the last element is that you have an objective to obtain or retain business, which is broadly defined. It includes payments that further the U.S. person's interests or would increase profits or decrease costs. Think of it in the broadest terms possible. So those are the elements of a violation. As we move forward, we have a third scenario for you, which highlights the way in which a payment might be offered to obtain or retain business.
Did you see this memo? Corporate back in the States wants me to deliver them 10 new stores in the next 12 months, 1 calendar year.
Right.
That's like doing 10,000 back in the States. I mean, look where we are, for heaven's sakes. It's impossible to get anything done. How, you know, our careers are going to come to an abrupt end if we don't do the 10 stores. How are we going to do this?
I think if we find a local guy, I know a guy as a matter of fact, who can help us communicate with the locals.
I know a guy.
I know a guy.
You know
he can
a guy.
communicate quickly, efficiently. He can get this done for us. He has a reputation for making problems disappear. And I think we'll have to pay him a fee to get it done, but it'll be worth it.
Well, the last 2 overseas countries I worked in for the company, there was somebody like that. I guess we'd call him kind of a fixer, somebody who really has the inside track. I mean, I hardly speak the language here. I really don't know the culture. We need somebody with an inside track. You have somebody, or you can find somebody like that?
Let me make a call. I know a guy on the ground who I think has a long history of being able to get this kind of stuff done. There's going to be a fee involved, but if we pay it, I think it'll make our problems go away.
All right, we got to do this. Thanks.
I agree.
Later that same day,
I spoke to the guy that I talked to you about this morning, and I think he's going to be able to do it. He sounds very good. He's the guy I knew about. He's going to invoice us an amount every month. It's going to vary on how much work he does, but he's going to call it a legal fee because he's helping us resolve zoning and permitting and similar problems. And that sounds good to me. If we're taking care of building and zoning permits, that's a legal issue, and it'll be easier to get it approved if we call it a legal fee. And he will take care of it.
You're right about that. Now, you're confident that this is the person?
He's been able to fix these kinds of problems in the past, and he will get this done at the speed at which you and I need to get it done.
So we're just going to plug it into our legal budget. We're going to pay him so much a month, and the monthly payments are going to vary a little bit depending upon what he gets done. I think that's good. I don't think it's a problem. How can it be a problem? It's a legal fee. You know, we're going to get this done, and you and I are going to go back to the States, and we're going to be high up on the food chain.
We're going to look
You're
like heroes.
terrific. Thanks.
My pleasure.
Good job.
Glad to do it.
Okay.
I'd like to make a few observations about the third scenario that we just showed to you. This scenario involved a U.S. company operating in a different country, and its subsidiary there made substantial payments, $24 million, to agents in order to facilitate obtaining permits more quickly, or obtain permits in situations where they probably would not have been available otherwise because of the circumstances. The company's objective was to open locations more quickly, and so they were trying to increase their business in the country, and they did it by any means possible, including making these payments. And they disguised them as legal fees because they felt that they could do so because they were helping to remove roadblocks for legal permits and approvals. The company thus far has paid more than $430 million in fines, and they're also facing shareholder lawsuits because the value of the stock dropped when the news was released that the company had engaged in this behavior. And there are also suits in other countries as well because they were found to be conducting business in this way in multiple jurisdictions. So the benefit of paying the payments and advancing opening the locations has proven to not be worth it given the amount of money that they've paid in fines and the lawsuits that they're facing. This company was Walmart, and it's been widely reported that Walmart suffered a very public disclosure of the fact that it was making payments in its Mexican subsidiary. They opened the locations in part to beat their competitors, but they did so at a very substantial cost, as I just described. We've talked about the elements of a violation, and we've given you scenarios to illustrate how those elements play out in actual conduct by companies. All of the scenarios that we used involved real-life situations that have been documented in court cases. Let's talk a little bit about the penalties for a violation. If we look at two of the main statutes involved, first the UK Bribery Act, we can see that there are criminal penalties. The criminal penalties for individuals are up to 10 years in prison and unlimited fines. So as an employee or an agent, as an individual, you can go to jail for 10 years, or you can be fined an unlimited amount. And as a company, you can be fined an unlimited amount. In the U.S., under the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, we have both criminal penalties and civil penalties. As an individual, your criminal penalties can be up to 5 years in prison per violation, up to $250,000 per violation. You can also have civil penalties imposed. So even if you're not indicted, even if you don't go to jail, there may also be a civil case against you, which would require a lower threshold of proof. And in those scenarios, the fine would be $10,000 per violation. You may also face additional penalties if the government decides to pursue a penalty that is tied to the amount of profit received or the amount of cost that was incurred as a result of making the payment and trying to obtain that improper advantage. So if a company would make $300 million in profits, they may find that that is used to calculate an additional penalty of $600 million. Under the U.S. law, a corporation can face criminal penalties of up to $2 million per violation and civil fines of $10,000 per violation, as well as the additional penalty of doubling the profit that they might have received, that gain, or any loss that incurred if the situation involves a loss. There are also additional penalties for violations imposed on a company, which could include being debarred from government contracts. They're not able to bid on government contracts, or they may lose government contracts that they currently have. They may be prevented from participating in federal agency programs. In addition, they may have to disgorge profits that they made, as I mentioned. They may be prevented from receiving export licenses to export product. They may also find that there are implications on the visa status of other employees who may be employed in the country. And they may be subject to ongoing monitoring by a third party who will monitor the company's activities for the government for a period of time in the future. Companies are also facing shareholder suits if a shareholder is unhappy that the company has been found to have violated an anti-corruption law. Shareholders may sue because they feel that that has devalued the company in some way. And then there are also private lawsuits that are being brought by competitors who feel that they lost a contract or that there was improper action taken to prevent them from competing for business in a country. So they may sue under that country's version of the RICO Act. Additional penalties include legal fees, compliance costs, and other defense costs. And we should note that even if the enforcement action does not result in a conviction or a judgment, companies, because companies often settle, the costs of defense and the negative press to a company are very substantial. That reputational loss to a business often takes a period of time to recover from. And in many cases, directors and officers' insurance coverage may not cover this type of liability, so the company has to pay the liability directly. So we've talked about the elements of a violation, and we've talked about the fines and the penalties that are involved. We should talk a little bit about current enforcement trends. Current enforcement is definitely on the rise. Anti-bribery and anti-corruption efforts are a key enforcement objective worldwide. The enforcement against individuals is particularly at a place where it's increasing greatly because much of the evidence is gathered about individual activities. There's also, as I mentioned earlier, great cooperation among countries. There are several cases currently that involve multiple countries and multiple regions where governments have really banded together to find out what the activities of a company were, and they brought enforcement action against that company as a result. Most countries now have a dedicated enforcement team which focuses solely on anti-corruption and anti-bribery. So that team has time and attention and budgets to focus on the activities of companies. The enforcement is very aggressive. They use undercover operations, they use informants, there are wiretaps that are used, there are whistleblowers in an industry, and there's very often industry or sector-based investigations. So if they find that there's one company in a particular industry that is found to have been engaged in anti-competitive behavior, then there's further scrutiny on the industry as a whole by enforcement officials. I wanted to show you the top 10 enforcement actions in the U.S., sort of all time, the amounts of money that are involved. You can see that many of these companies are not US-based companies. Many of them are actually foreign companies. I mention this for a couple of reasons. One, to show you that the U.S. government is going after companies globally, and that same activity is occurring in other countries, that they're looking not just at their own companies that are based in that country, but they're also looking at foreign countries who are operating in that country. And also just to show you the amounts of money involved and the fact that many of them have been settled or resolved over the last couple of years. So the amounts are as high as $800 million, and in the top 10 list, the lowest amount is $185 million. These are all substantial companies. Some of them are publicly traded, which also increases the amount of the fine. Just last year alone, the top 10 cases resulted in $1.5 billion in criminal and civil penalties, disgorgement of profits, and prejudgment interest. But over the last decade, I would say that the average fine to a company has been about $10 million. So even in the smallest of violations, a company can receive a fine of a substantial amount. In terms of individuals receiving prison sentences, I would say on average they're somewhere between 24 months and 39 months, depending on the activity, which is quite a substantial period of time. The company has an anti-corruption compliance program. As you know, the company has taken several steps to communicate to its employees its position on corruption and bribery. The company's program involves support and commitment from the very top levels, including the board. The company has a written anti-corruption policy which they provided to all employees. And the company has committed to enforce this policy. The program has oversight by senior officers at the company, and there are internal disciplinary measures that are included in the policy if there's found to be a violation. The company wants to ensure that there's compliance with the policy. And so they have set up internal controls to be sure that the policy is being followed by all of the employees and agents at the company. The program overall includes training, of which this program is a part. And as you know, the company has a confidential hotline so that if you believe that there's a violation or you've experienced an incident where someone has requested that you make a payment, that you are able to call the hotline and report that incident and also follow up and communicate that in writing. And there will be periodic reviews and audits of the company's program to ensure that it is robust and that there is compliance with the company's policy. If you suspect that there's an issue, you want to involve the company's general counsel immediately, and you want to use the company's hotline to report that issue. Be sure to move quickly because it's very difficult to change a first impression. If someone has requested that you make a payment, you want to be sure to communicate what has happened as quickly as possible before that person may change their story because they have concern about being. So we've completed our training on anti-corruption and anti-bribery. We've given you the elements of a violation and an understanding of what the penalties are if there is a violation. You will be receiving a short set of questions to answer to assess whether you've understood the training that we provided to you, and you will be asked to complete those questions so that the company can assess your understanding. Thank you very much.